Hi, Manny. Good to see you.
Todd, pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us as well. So, business transformation. Sometimes I think as we've gone through this pandemic, if I had one of those word clouds, the terms business transformation would pop out really, really brightly over the last year or so. So I know you've had an opportunity to look at companies and industries across a wide spectrum and look at what they've done and how they've come through the pandemic, what they're doing to transform their businesses. So when you look across all of those industries and you're talking to bankers, what would be the most important things that you think bankers need to know or prepare for in order to serve their clients going forward? And what roles should they be playing in trying to help their clients do this transformation?
Yes, Todd, thanks for the question. I'll start maybe just by acknowledging that this overused term business transformation, normally it does happen periodically across industries with individual companies based on natural cycles of their strategies, their business models, sometimes the chief executive transitions. So it's not like business transformations don't always happen. Now, I will say on top of that, probably for the last decade, digital technologies have enabled a large swath of companies, including banking itself, to actually get into true business transformation because of everything technology can do. But I do think if the question is, the session's called post-COVID, I think we've all seen, you've all lived it, that the last, depending on what part of the world you're in, 18 months, 15 months, 12 months, what we've all had to do because of COVID has accelerated the impact of and the potential of business transformation on business processes, business models, how consumers buy, how investors think. And as many industries actually survived, some didn't do so well, some did better. I wouldn't exaggerate when I'd say pretty much every industry, every CEO that I know and that we work with is thinking about how do we transform our underlying business processes as we come out of COVID, taking the benefit of what we all learned how to do well, like interacting this way on this platform, but also how our customers changed, how our competitors have changed, and how our investors have changed. So for bankers who are often the enablers, the funders, the investors, the supporters of the how a company has to invest and make a business transformation happen, I think you have to understand this is happening everywhere, and understanding where, why, by industry, by company, with all the forces. That's a pretty important part of the role of the financier and the enabler.
Sure. And so when I was listening to the last panel and they were discussing, long live the office is dead. So one of the comments that I think Kat mentioned that struck me was how many people either dread or just can't conceive of going back to working in an office 5 days a week after what they've been through for the last 16 months or so. When you think about some of the evolutions, digitization and human behavior evolutions that have happened as a result of the pandemic, are there any that you think will sort of bounce back to what they were pre-pandemic, or certain ones that are, we've moved on and behavior has changed for good? And what do you see are some of the lessons learned from companies and how they're going to go forward?
So let's go from business transformation broadly, maybe Todd, to the question you're asking is obviously one part of businesses and what we do is actually how we work. The workforce, the employees, the teams. We can have separate conversations later on investors or customers. But how we work, and we all learn how to work at home, for better or for worse. Obviously, essential workers continued, but for the classic professional services, bankers, management, consultants, we generally figured out how to work at home. So you asked the question, what did we learn? On one side of the fence, I think everybody got surprised very fast. If you recall last year, we had so much uncertainty in March, April, May. Could we actually do this? What will happen when everyone works from home? We all got surprised pretty fast that there are a lot of things that are actually enabled by working at home. It's inherently more efficient. You can port talent, expertise for anywhere in the world. It's arguably more sustainable for many of us. A big part of our carbon footprint are things like air travel. You could just get things done faster. You could bring a meeting like this. I'm not sure how many people are in the room without flying everyone to New York or Washington or London. So I think we've all seen the inherent efficiencies. And so that's one question in everybody's mind is how do we capture that? Costs are actually lower. Volumes are higher. A lot of industries, us included, are operating much higher levels of throughput, than we did in the same period a year ago. There is a set of liabilities that have come along the way. A lot of it's more at the people side, social capital, and happiness, stress, human-to-human contact. We are Homo sapiens. We are a social species after all. And so everybody is trying to sort out what is the balance to whatever this model is. And I'll tell you, it's all over the map. This has become a cottage industry as we talk to, because it's different by industry. It could be different by location. It could be different by job function. It could be different by level of the company. And you have at one extreme, Jamie or Goldman or the New York bankers that get everyone in the office to recapture some of that team spirit and ethos in getting it done. You have some companies here in the West Coast that says, you never need to come back, or you come back only if you want to. I've talked to companies in the middle that says, do we have a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday model? So I think the answer will evolve. We're actually seeing it play out in different parts of the world where there's little mini environment ecosystems. Well, how's it playing out in China or Australia or Korea versus here? It's clear to me, Todd, it'll be a blend of both. We're going to have to figure out as a workforce how to capture some of the inherent efficiencies, which are arguably part of the digital transformation agenda of doing work this way. But we have to build team and culture and loyalty and relationships and social capital. And you can't do that 100% without ever meeting people. So it'll be a mix. What that'll be, everyone can speculate for their own business, and I'm happy to share ours. But.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I have seen some of the data that has shown the increase in productivity and the increase in efficiency, and I imagine that plays through from a financial balance sheet perspective for some companies, but there is the question of how sustainable it is, which actually leads me to another topic, which is sustainability, but thinking about it more in an ESG perspective. So I know that Bain has recently published its 2021 impact report, and there was some interesting things that you all have highlighted, connecting the dots between ESG and human capital and business leadership, and maybe we can take them sort of one at a time. So if we look at ESG, from your perspective, what role should the banking industry play, and how well is the banking industry addressing this topic right now in your eyes?
Well, I think the role is it should play a big role, and I actually think it's addressing it reasonably well and reasonably fast. So when you use the term ESG, obviously in the broadest sense, the dominant force in that the last few years is the E part. It's environment, it's carbon footprint, it's sustainability, and I would say that this has been a macro force that's actually has had the potential for years now to drive a business transformation agenda, and it's reached a tipping point. Frankly, this started pre-COVID, Todd. I felt the World Economic Forum in Davos now a year and a half ago, it went from lip service to real, that companies actually cared about the environment as the right thing to do. And things like the Business Roundtable embracing stakeholder capitalism, the International Business Council at the WEF, chaired by Brian Moynihan, wanting all companies to measure sustainable goals. And frankly, like you asked, how do bankers play? Well, as we've seen, we published some of the data in this report that 3 out of 4 customers now care about the sustainability and environmental footprint of the products they buy. 3 out of 4 employees, sub 40, actually care about what their company is doing in this space as a function, as a variable in their choice of workplace. And 3 out of 4 investors care, because guess what? If employees care about it and customers care about it, the financials will follow. Yeah. And so the fact that you now have to, thoughtfully measure, and so bankers in the broadest sense, I'll call that from investors to consumer banks to corporate banks, you have to follow where the market is going, and this is now a long-term source of value and strategy for companies. And so I think how you measure it, how you evaluate risk, how you look at returns, it's still a little bit of the Wild West, candidly, because we haven't established natural standard global norms, and there's a lot of work going on in many organizations. But the E part of ESG is real, and I think the last 2 years, its time has actually come.
Yeah, and so I find it interesting to talk about sort of sustainability in the future of the business perspective. I now have a couple of daughters entering the workplace, and this is a topic that's actually important to them when they're talking to companies about wanting to work for certain companies. And it's something, when I think about when I was entering the workforce, it was not a discussion at all, but it's actually a real factor for how they're making choices. So when we talk about that, actually, I want to talk about Bain for a second, because Bain has been widely recognized as one of the best companies to work for. Maybe you can share with us what it is about your corporate culture and what it is about the profile of people that you bring in that makes it consistently one of the best places to work.
Well, thank you, Todd, for acknowledging that. Part of it is for professional services companies, of which financial services and bankers are too. It's on strategy, because guess what? The product is the people. And you could say you can connect the dots. If you're Nike, the product's the shoe. You need to have designers who make it. Or if you're IBM, and the product is the systems, the hardware and the software, but you need the technology. For firms like us, it's literally that's who you buy. Embedded expertise, intellectual property, and change management. And so it's actually very on strategy. That it's kind of simple. You have to attract and retain your people, and there's a high correlation in industries like ours with to talent loyalty and customer loyalty. Because if your people leave, it's a lot less. That there's your product, there's your factory going out the door. So I do think it starts with the mindset of wanting to make it a great place to work, because that is the key to building long-term talent loyalty and talent capability. And so the entire business system is anchored around, are we evaluating, recruiting, training, promoting, developing, all throughout. The incentives of the company are highly set based on, how your people do. It's arguably in our business model more important that your people are developing and getting better than equally important things like, what revenues or profits do you generate. And so that's an ongoing thing. And not to front run what might be your next question, you referenced your daughters, and I have three kids in the workforce and one in college myself. Any company in today's world that wants to attract and then retain, and retention is arguably even harder than attraction, because very few people are like me left who are 30 years with one company. It has a direct correlation. The company needs to have a strategy and an identity, back to our other topic. It has to be a company with purpose. It has to be a company that's sustainable. It has to have a company that, your daughters would be proud to work for. And it might not be the same criteria that you and I would have picked, 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah. And actually, I guess so. Maybe a question before I talk a little bit about the makeup of the workforce. But when you think about having been with a company for 30 years, one of the things that I think we have heard, we have seen, is that today's workforce is more mobile, and some of the things that they prioritize may be a little bit different. When you think about transformation and business transformation, how do you view the mix of having new talent coming in on a fairly regular basis versus having sort of sustained, embedded intellectual property that stays within your company?
It's always a tough question, Todd. And you started with, what is the mix? And I think what happens in business transformation, usually you are building on some of the talent and capabilities of the company. But back to the transforming, you also are generally needing to build new ones. Any financial service company right now is building digital skills. They're building advanced analytic skills. They're building ways to assess ESG. Back to our past topic. So you are simultaneously wanting to bring in new sources of talent, new hiring, while keeping the best of what made the company successful. And the only way for that mix to actually work is somehow if the transformation results in growth, because you're going to try to promote, retain, advance, the best of the existing core, but you're going to build new ones. But the magic is in what that mix is. And I think what happened to a lot of companies over the last year is because the ability to build loyalty, keep people longer, they could figure that out with the historic strong businesses that companies had. In all these new talent, people are actually having to work much harder to say, how do we create a loyalty construct for a new data scientist or a new next generation person, for your daughter or mine who want to do the next thing. And so it's very important for this new group, that things like purpose, things like mission, that it's actually a two-way street. And I sometimes wish candidly that there was more of an inherent I don't know, loyalty gene. Or
Yeah.
what can you do for me? The old John Kennedy inauguration, ask not what you can, because right now what's happening is a lot of people, what can you do for me, right? That's sort of
Right.
this
Yeah.
generational dynamic versus, well, what can you do for the company? And that's a
Yeah.
balance we'll need to figure out as a society, candidly.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a real tricky question. One other thing that I think we've heard about, we've talked about, we've seen, we've lived over the past year is there's been a lot more emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've seen not only at a company level, but quite frankly, at a national level in certain places where policies have been put in place to try to address some of these issues. But forgive me for this because I can be a little cynical. In some cases, I've heard some of the same language around diversity, equity, and inclusion over the past 20 years. Now, I know Bain and Company has been very active, and you're, one of the founding companies in 110. So there are some things that are different. Maybe you can talk about, from your perspective, what's changed about this topic, and how should we be looking at measuring success when it comes to
DE&I? I think it's okay to be cynical on some of this stuff, Todd, because it's been, for various flavors on it, we've been at it for a long, long time. I'd say what's changed is, at one level, the purity of the old, Milton Friedman, it's all about the shareholder, this pivot from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism, and that umbrella that enabled ESG. And this is part of the S of ESG. As it got real for companies and for the workforce, that's made it real. Now, if I look at diversity specifically, most companies have been on a journey for a long time, arguably decades, on every flavor of diversity. For a lot of companies, we started with, we have a lot more men than women. That's an important part of diversity. And obviously, race is something that we've always wanted to work on. And the premise that a more diverse team, and there's a lot of data, is better. And yet, the progress that and so it become multifaceted. Do you build a diverse workforce? If I'm a company like Bain, do I have men and women, Blacks and Latinx and Asian Americans? By the way, Americans versus internationals for a global firm is a very big issue. A very strong gay lesbian group. So we were all trying to advance the ball on diversity, while having it linked to it actually created business outcomes, right? The teams were strong. That this wasn't actually compensating it. You were doing it from a position of strength. And frankly, some companies, we all made progress at different rates. And I'd say the last year, the amount of attention and the elevation of its importance, with what happened to George Floyd, with how many companies like us took it seriously and celebrated Juneteenth, and then even on other aspects with the spike in anti-Asian American racism, and the deaths in Atlanta. It's elevated the importance. And back to the issue around people. Guess what? Our workforces, your daughters, my kids, they not just want a environmentally conscious company. They want a company that actually understands and embraces diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we've all made efforts to improve. But it's big, multifaceted issues that have lasted decades or centuries. And so, we have to be very practical. The reason, you mentioned 110, an organization that was really originally founded by Ken Frazier and Ken Chenault and a couple of others. They weren't trying to solve everything. They wanted to solve one specific thing where they could make a difference, right? Jobs for people who don't have 4-year college degrees. And they said, we're going to take a decade to make a difference in that. That was appealing to me because it's solvable. It's hard, but it's the solvable problem because you scope it narrowly enough.
Yeah, that's and I think I need to take that advice as well, which is focus on the one thing that you can solve. Sometimes we try to solve everything, and it's good for us to be much more narrowly focused. So we've talked about in the scope of business transformation, we've talked about technology and digitization, the impact that's had, the change in the work environment, and the impact of human capital in a changing workforce. We've talked about DE&I. We've talked about ESG. What haven't we talked about? What is there any other important topic to business transformation that we have not focused
on? I'd probably say two broad things, Todd, which we can go deeper on. And it touches on it. We've spent a lot of time on strategy and sort of the workforce. Any company's business transformation starts with the customer, and so even as bankers, understanding they're the source of revenues. It's your chance to win, attract, retain, and it's just as important. Some would argue it's even more important to build loyal customers as it is to build loyal employees. And so what's happened in this pandemic world is customer behaviors changed a lot. Customer loyalty changed a lot. You can imagine how suddenly everything you used to buy at a store, why have companies like Amazon, et cetera, done so well when you are now consuming, if you're an individual customer as opposed to a B2B customer, which many banks are, how you buy, what you buy, that's changed meaningfully too. And I do think there is connectivity. I mentioned that 3 out of 4 customers will say their customer behavior choices will be influenced by things. They might not change what they buy. They'll at least think about it, because we've had debates with clients. They say that, but they still buy that expensive luxury item. I've had a client tell me that. And so the proof is in the pudding. So I do think for bankers, for companies, as you understand transformation strategies coming out of the pandemic, what is happening to the customer, I do think is quite important. And and then the last major stakeholder is the investor. And that's public markets or private markets. And within private markets, depending on what kind of company, it's very different kinds of capital. I do think there was a big trend even prior to COVID on the rise of private capital. As you know, the private equity industry has disproportionately grown relative to listed companies, and we think that'll continue.
Yeah. So I have that etched in my head: customer loyalty greater than employee loyalty. So Manny, I know we've only got about 1 minute left, and so we've got roughly 2,000 people who have joined us from all over the globe. If you were able to offer one bit of advice that attendees could start doing tomorrow to advance the transformation, both within their companies and perhaps even in their own lives, how do they go about it? What's the one thing that they should do to change their own behavior?
I'd say, so thank you for the chance to talk to a global audience. I do think, we have been, I expect we will continue to be, despite all of the challenges, a global world. And the pandemic has actually, arguably, while its strength, it's created some barriers and boundaries physically. It's made it even easier to communicate and collaborate globally. So my guidance always to everyone in banking and broadly is to it's basically to understand the dialogue we've had, to get as broad a perspective as possible. And so as you think about, you said, should we invest in this? Should we fund this? Should we enable this? Understand transformation at the strategic level. What is happening in the industry? What is the company trying to do? Then you translate it to, well, ultimately that means there's customers who want to do something, and there's a business model and a workforce that are trying to deliver the needs of that customers. And somehow the magic there has to be funded in an economic value creating model. So I always encourage people to understand all the pieces and then zoom in on the part that you're enabling. And we're at a point in time when the long-term trends that we've been talking about ultimately get connected to your day-to-day, what do you transact, what do you fund. But I encourage all of you to do that, and I thank you for the opportunity to be with you.
Manny, thank you so much for taking your time to share your thoughts and your insights with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd.
And I will turn it back to you, Mr. Hogan.
Mr. Burwell, thank you very much. And thank you so much, Manny, for sharing your thoughts and insights so openly. It's really comforting to hear that in a world of technology, we still need to focus on the people side and also our customers. And the pandemic may even be an opportunity to strengthen that customer loyalty. Really looking forward to see how that pans out into the future.